Jessa Fairchild didn't mean to buy the extra coffee, but when the barista handed her 2 lattes instead of 1, she smiled, shrugged, and turned around to offer it to the man behind her in line. "Want a free coffee?" "I swear it's not poisoned." The stranger looked up from his phone, surprised, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He had this calm, effortless kind of energy, like he was used to being in charge of everything in the room without ever raising his voice. "I'll take my chances," he said, accepting the cup. "Thanks." "No problem," Jessa said, adjusting her tote bag on her shoulder. She didn't notice he was wearing a watch that probably cost more than her monthly rent. All she noticed was that he was maybe the most attractive man she'd seen in real life. Tall, clean-cut, expensive-looking but not in an obvious way. His smile was polite but reserved. She figured she'd never see him again. She was wrong. He watched her walk out the door, his coffee in hand, wondering why that tiny gesture felt like someone had just tossed a stone into still water, sending ripples through his perfectly controlled world. Isael Vaughn didn't do small talk, didn't accept random drinks, and didn't believe in fate. But something about the girl in the oversized sweater and messy bun had short-circuited his instincts. She hadn't recognized him, and for the first time in years, he didn't correct someone for not knowing who he was. That felt like a gift. Jessa was already late when she ran into him again, literally. She was balancing a cardboard box of donation items for the art center where she worked, trying to wrangle her phone under her chin, when she turned the corner too fast and collided with a solid wall of a man. The box crashed to the sidewalk. Socks, paints, and old sketchbooks exploded everywhere. "Oh no, crap, I'm so sorry," she dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather everything. "Jessa," she looked up and blinked. "You." He crouched down next to her, that same warm coffee-colored gaze focused on her face. "You gave me a coffee yesterday. You took it," she said, smiling despite the mess. "Still alive, I see." "Barely," he said, handing her a roll of pencils. "I've been thinking about that coffee," she laughed. "Really? You should probably think about better things." "I don't think I want to." He helped her gather the rest of the items, and before she could stop herself, she was asking, "Do you always help strangers pick up socks in the middle of the street?" "Only if they give me coffee first," she snorted. "That's a very specific rule." He stood, holding the box effortlessly in one arm. "Where are you taking this?" The community art center down the street. I work there, volunteer mostly." "I'll walk you," she blinked. "You don't have to, I want to," and he did. They walked the 6 blocks to the center, chatting about art and city noise and how the subway always smelled like regret. She liked his voice steady, low, with a rasp that made everything he said feel important. He didn't tell her he was Isael Vaughn, billionaire CEO of Vaughn Dynamics, tech mogul, and the kind of man whose photos ended up in Forbes, GQ, and the business section of every major paper. He didn't say any of that. He just said, "I'm Isael," she told him, Jessa. He liked how she said his name like it wasn't attached to a billion-dollar company. Over the next few days, he kept showing up, at the cafe near the center, at the gallery where she worked on weekends. Once, outside the bodega near her apartment, holding 2 coffees. "You really liked that first one, huh?" she teased. "I thought I'd return the favor." They sat on the curb and drank together, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her mom, who passed away 2 years ago, and how she'd sold the house to pay for the art center's funding shortfall. He told her, not much, that he worked in tech, that he was boring, that he didn't have family in the city. She never pressed. He liked that. She didn't want anything from him. She didn't even Google him, and that made him want to give her everything. Jessa didn't mean to fall for him. It just happened. It was the way he remembered how she took her coffee 1 sugar, no cream. How he always showed up when she needed help, never overbearing, just there, steady, quiet, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, and the way he never made her feel small. One night, after a long day at the center, she found him waiting outside with a paper bag of Thai food. "Dinner," he said. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." They sat on the floor of her tiny studio apartment, eating dumplings and watching some terrible reality show she insisted was research for a future painting. He looked at her, his expression soft. "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You keep saying that, she teased. Should I be worried? No, he said. I should, she laughed, then paused. Why? I'm falling for you, Jessa, she froze. He didn't take it back. I'm not asking you to say it back, he said gently. I needed you to know, her heart pounded. I don't even know what you do for work, he smiled. Would it change anything? Maybe, she whispered. Would you tell me? He hesitated. Soon, she nodded. Okay, and somehow that was enough. 2 weeks later, she found out anyway. She'd been helping the center prep for their annual fundraiser gala when her boss handed her the guest list. Hey, Jessa, her boss called. You're in charge of welcoming the big donor, Isael Vaughn. No idea what he looks like, but he's a major player. Donated half the budget this year. Jessa dropped the clipboard. She stared at the name. Read it again. Isael Vaughn, her Isael. No, she left the center early, hands shaking. When he showed up outside her apartment that night, she opened the door without a word. You knew, she said. I didn't lie. You didn't tell me the truth either. I wanted you to see me, not the money, not the name. I did, she whispered. I saw you, that's why it hurts. He stepped forward, voice low. Jessa, I'm still me. I'm the same guy who sat on the curb with you, who brought you dinner. Who I need space, she said, backing up. His jaw clenched like it physically hurt him to let her go, but he nodded. If you walk away now, I'll give you space. But I won't stop loving you. She shut the door before she could break, and he stood outside alone, wondering if that extra coffee had been the best mistake of his life, or the one that would leave him heartbroken. The gala was a sea of glitter and tension. Jessa stood just inside the ballroom entrance, the hem of her black dress brushing the marble floor as she gripped the welcome cards a little too tightly. She hadn't wanted to come. Every part of her screamed to stay home, to avoid the confrontation, to pretend none of it had happened. But the art center depended on this night, and she'd promised her boss she would help. She didn't need to ask who he was when he arrived. Isael stepped through the double doors like he belonged to the room, and he did. The air shifted around him as conversations paused, heads tilted, and eyes followed. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him with the kind of precision that came from private tailoring and quiet power. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze locked on hers the moment he entered. She didn't look away. He crossed the room with long, purposeful strides, his presence quiet but commanding, and stopped in front of her without breaking eye contact. You came, he said. She nodded once, her voice low. Because I said I would. For the center, his gaze flicked to the welcome cards in her hands. You look beautiful. I'm here to work, Isael. You're angry. You have every right to be. She looked past him, scanning the crowd to avoid the weight of his stare. You're the one who kept secrets. I didn't want to be another man who used what he had to get what he wanted, so you lied by omission instead. I didn't expect to care about you the way I do. She turned back to him, her voice steady. That's not enough, not here. Not now. Before he could respond, her boss appeared, smiling tightly. Mr. Vaughn, thank you again for being here. We're honored. Isael offered a polite nod, but his eyes stayed on Jessa. The honor's mine. She left them standing there and moved toward the registration table, her heartbeat uneven. She didn't glance back. Couldn't. Later, while the crowd gathered near the silent auction tables, she caught sight of him again. He wasn't mingling like the other donors. He wasn't surrounded by admirers or holding court with board members. He was watching her, just her. From across the room, like the rest of the glittering chaos didn't exist, she turned away, but not before she saw something flicker across his face. Not regret, not frustration, something softer. Something that scared her more than anything else. She found a quiet corner in the hallway leading to the coach room and leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her chest. The sound of heels clicked behind her, but it wasn't Isael. It was a woman, a striking brunette with polished poise and sharp eyes. She stopped beside Jessa, inspecting her with the kind of interest that didn't feel friendly. You're the artist, the woman said evenly. From the community center, Jessa straightened. Yes, I'm Camilla. Isael's business partner. Jessa didn't reply. He's not himself lately, Camilla said, glancing down the hallway. He's distracted, unfocused. That's not like him. Jessa crossed her arms. Maybe he's just human. Camilla smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He's not like other men. He doesn't have the luxury of being careless. You should be careful what you mean to him. I didn't realize meaning something to someone was a threat. Camilla's gaze narrowed slightly. You may think his world is exciting, that being the exception makes you special. But that world doesn't bend for anyone, no matter how sincere their intentions are. Jessa's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. Thanks for the warning. Camilla gave a faint nod and walked away, her heels echoing down the corridor. Jessa remained where she was, her pulse loud in her ears. She'd never been warned off a man before. She wasn't sure whether to be furious or afraid. When she returned to the ballroom, Isael was gone, or so she thought. He found her on the balcony 10 minutes later, away from the noise and champagne and curated laughter. The night air was cool against her skin, and the city shimmered behind her like a million tiny promises. I didn't ask her to speak to you, he said. She turned slowly. You knew, she's predictable when she wants to protect something. And you're something worth protecting, I think you are, she exhaled, her hands resting on the stone railing. I don't belong in your world. I never asked you to. You're used to people being impressed. I'm not impressed, Isael. I'm overwhelmed. I don't want you impressed. I want you to see me, like you did before. I don't know who you are. He stepped closer, not touching her, just hovering in that space that made her bones feel too aware of themselves. I own a company that employs over 20,000 people. I've built systems that governments use. I've been in rooms with heads of state, but none of it makes me feel the way I feel when I'm sitting in your apartment watching you talk about brushstroke techniques. She swallowed hard. Then why didn't you just say so? He looked away for the first time. Because I've had people pretend to love me for what I am, and I wanted one thing that wasn't touched by all of that. I don't want your money. I know, she hesitated. But I need the truth. I'll give you everything, he said, all of it, no more shields, no more pretending. She studied him, searching for cracks, but he wasn't hiding, not anymore. Then tell me something no one else knows. He didn't blink. I haven't been in a relationship in 7 years. Not a real one, not since my mother died. That surprised her. Why? Because I stopped believing anyone could love me without needing something from me, until you. The silence between them stretched, heavy with everything unspoken. She looked down at her hands. I don't know if I can do this. I won't rush you, a beat passed. But I'm not walking away, he added. She closed her eyes. That's not fair. I've never been fair, but I'm trying to be honest. The music from inside drifted onto the balcony, distant and muffled. She felt the weight of his honesty like it was something she could hold in her palm. Finally, she stepped back. I need time, he nodded once. Take it. She turned and left without saying goodbye. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way he looked at her like she mattered more than billion-dollar deals and private jets. She thought about the woman who'd warned her off, the world Isael came from, the endless expectations and invisible rules. She also remembered the way he'd stood in the cold just to talk to her, the way he didn't try to fix her problems with money, the way he listened. The next morning, she found a package at her door. Inside was a sketch pad, the good kind, heavyweight paper, unused, expensive. Tucked inside was a single note, handwritten. No expectations, just space to create. She stared at it for a long time, her heart aching in places she didn't know had been shut down. Then she picked up a pencil and started to draw. Jessa stood in the lobby of the Westchester Children's Museum, her fingers trailing over the edge of a table draped with donated canvases. The midday light filtered through the tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the tiled floor. She had come to deliver a few art kits funded by the community center's outreach program, but her mind wasn't on the task. It had been 3 weeks since the gala. 3 weeks since Isael had stood in that moonlit space and told her the truth without flinching. 3 weeks since she'd walked away, not because she didn't feel something for him, but because she didn't know if she could live in the space between who they were and what they came from. But every time she picked up a pencil lately, it was his face that emerged from the lines. Not a perfect likeness, just the shape of his jaw, the weight of his gaze, the tension in his shoulders when he thought no one was watching. She hadn't called, he hadn't pushed, and yet every day she found something else he'd done quietly without fanfare. A new shipment of supplies for the center, a repaired pipe in the gallery's backroom she hadn't even reported yet. A grant check delivered anonymously to the school where she once taught part-time art classes. He wasn't showing off, he was simply still there, a quiet presence she couldn't shake. As she set the last box down, there was a soft voice behind her. "You're Jessa Fairchild, right?" She turned, surprised. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, stood there holding a sketch pad. His shoes were too big, his hair messy in that way that said he dressed himself. "I am," she said gently. "Can I help you?" He held out the sketch pad. "Are you the one who sent these?" She blinked. "I helped, yes." He opened to a page, revealing a rough charcoal drawing of a city street crooked, a little uneven but brimming with movement. "I used to think I was bad at drawing," he said. "But my teacher said I wasn't. She said I just needed better paper." Jessa crouched to eye level, heart tugging. Well, she was right. He beamed, then added, "There was a letter with the stuff. It said a woman named Jessa used to draw on the backs of receipts when she was my age." She laughed softly, caught off guard. "That's true. I think I'll keep drawing." Then he turned and ran off before she could say anything else. She stood slowly, breath caught. Isael had written that letter. She hadn't told anyone that detail, not even him. He must have remembered it from the night they'd eaten Thai food on her living room floor, back when she mentioned her childhood sketches lined the inside flaps of receipts from her mom's diner job. He'd remembered. And he'd shared it with a child he'd never met. That's what finally broke her. She left the museum without finishing her delivery log and caught the train uptown, her heart pounding louder than the rumble of the tracks. She didn't call ahead. She didn't plan what to say. She just knew she had to see him. When she arrived at the building, the doorman gave her a curious glance, but didn't stop her. She remembered the penthouse number from the gala's contact sheet. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the elevator button. The doors opened directly into a spacious loft with cathedral ceilings and walls of glass that offered a full view of the skyline, but she barely noticed any of it. Isael stood near the window, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a tablet in one hand. He looked up, pausing mid-scroll. She stepped forward. "I saw the letter," she said. His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders softened. "How did you know it was me?" "No one else knew about the receipts." He set the tablet down. "I didn't expect you. I didn't plan to come." He approached slowly, careful not to close the distance too quickly. "But you did." "I'm not here because of what you've done," she said. "I'm here because of who you did it for." He studied her, silent. "I realized," she continued, "that you were never trying to impress me. You were just trying to stay real in a world that doesn't make much room for that." "I didn't want to lose the one thing that felt untouched," he said. She nodded, suddenly unsure. "Can we talk?" He gestured to a couch near the window. She sat, sinking into the soft gray cushions while he took the seat opposite her. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "You live in a world with silent drivers and stock portfolios and private chefs. I live among chipped mugs and dried paint. I don't know if we fit." Isael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I don't want someone who fits into my world. I want someone who makes me question it." She blinked. "I've been in rooms with people who would sell their soul for a sliver of control," he said. "But you gave me a coffee and didn't ask for my name. You gave your time, your heart, your energy to people who couldn't give anything back. You don't need wealth to be valuable, Jessa." She stared at the skyline, fighting the lump in her throat. "I don't want to be your escape. You're not. I don't want to be a project either. You're not that either." She turned to him. "Then what am I?" He stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with a box. Inside was her first painting, the one she'd sold in a charity auction 3 years ago. She hadn't seen it since. "I bought this before I met you," he said. "Long before." Her breath caught. "I didn't know your name, I didn't know your face, but I saw this and I couldn't stop looking." He handed it to her. "I thought the artist must have known something the rest of us forgot." She touched the edge of the canvas. "You've had this all along," he nodded. "I didn't realize it was yours until after the gala." She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I didn't want to use it as proof. I wanted to show you that I saw you before I ever knew you." Tears stung her eyes. "I don't have a penthouse," she whispered, "or an empire. I don't even have a dishwasher." He smiled gently. "I have more than enough dishwashers," she laughed, wiping her cheek. "But I don't have you," he said, stepping closer. She rose from the couch, the painting still in her hands. I don't know what this will look like, she said, but I want to find out. He reached for her hand. So do I. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time she didn't feel out of place in his world. She felt like she belonged in his arms. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with reverence. Like she was something he'd waited for, not something he'd conquered. And Jessa realized that maybe love didn't care about matching lives or balancing scales. Maybe it just needed one person to walk toward the other, without fear, without pretense, just truth. Rain tapped lightly against the glass walls of Isael's penthouse as Jessa stood at his kitchen counter, barefoot and wrapped in one of his white button-downs, sleeves rolled to her elbows and the hem brushing her thighs. She was flipping through a portfolio of her recent sketches, the smell of dark roast coffee lingering between them. He leaned against the doorway, still in sweatpants and a charcoal t-shirt, watching her with that quiet intensity she was only just beginning to understand. His bare feet crossed at the ankles, arms folded, mug in hand. I've been thinking, he said. She didn't look up. That sounds dangerous, he grinned. I want to fund a new wing at the community center. She froze, her fingers stilling on the page. Isael. No strings, no plaques. No naming rights, just more space, more supplies, more kids getting what they need. She turned slowly, searching his face. You can't keep doing these things without asking. Then I'm asking now. Her expression softened, but she shook her head. It's not that simple. If you do this, people will start to see me differently. They'll think I'm using you. Let them. I care what people think. I care what you need. She exhaled, setting the portfolio aside. I'm not afraid of help. I'm afraid of being misunderstood. He stepped closer, setting his mug down on the counter. Then we do it your way, quietly, anonymously. You lead, I follow. She blinked. You don't follow anyone. I do now. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full of trust. Later that week, she brought him to the center not as a donor, not as a billionaire, but as someone who wanted to see. The staff didn't recognize him in jeans and worn sneakers. He let her lead, asking questions, listening as she pointed out the cracked tiles, the dented cabinets, the peeling paint in the art room. He didn't take notes or frown critically. He just watched her. In the middle of a supply closet, she turned to him suddenly. You don't flinch when things aren't perfect. He raised an eyebrow. Should I? Most men I've dated couldn't handle a broken copier, let alone a leaking ceiling. I've seen worse. Her voice dropped. What's the worst thing you've seen? He hesitated, then answered quietly. My father had a stroke when I was 17. He couldn't speak for the last year of his life. I spent most of that time pretending I wasn't angry. She stared at him, absorbing that. No one knew, he added. I didn't let them. She stepped toward him, laying her palm against his chest. And you still don't. I'm trying. You're doing better than trying. He leaned in, brushing his lips against her forehead. So are you. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that neither of them expected. She painted in the mornings with the kind of focus she hadn't felt in years. He worked from her apartment sometimes, laptop balanced on her chipped dining table, occasionally glancing up to watch her sketch, like she was a miracle he didn't want to miss. One afternoon, she caught him standing in front of a canvas she'd abandoned weeks ago, an abstract swirl of blue and rust red that had never quite come together. You see something in that? She asked from the doorway. I see a start. She crossed her arms. It's a mess. So was my first company. Doesn't mean it wasn't worth building. She tilted her head. You're comparing my art to a tech empire. I'm saying value doesn't always look polished. She smiled. That might be the best thing anyone's ever said about my work. He turned. Then I'll keep saying it. One evening, he invited her to a dinner that wasn't corporate or exclusive or filled with people trying to impress him. It was at his mother's old brownstone, now converted into a space he rarely used, but never let go of. This place feels like a memory, she said as they stepped inside. It is, he replied, but I want new ones. There were no suits, no speeches. Just a handful of people she'd never met: his godmother, a childhood friend from Boston, a woman who'd once taught him piano. They welcomed Jessa like she was already a part of the story. After dessert, Isael walked her through the garden in the back, where vines crawled up brick walls and fairy lights blinked above them like stars. I used to sit here after my mom's chemo sessions, he said. I thought if I stared hard enough, something would change. She reached for his hand. You carry a lot. I want to carry less. You can, she said. But not alone. That night, back in her apartment, he traced the line of her spine with his fingertips and whispered, I don't want to live in fractions anymore. She turned in his arms. Then don't. The next morning, she found a small velvet box on her windowsill. Inside was a necklace not flashy, not dripping in diamonds. A single gold charm shaped like a paintbrush, no bigger than her thumbnail. She held it up without a word. It reminded me of who you are, he said from the kitchen. She fastened it around her neck, the charm resting just above her collarbone. I don't know what to say. He poured her coffee. You already did. One afternoon, she brought him to a rooftop above the art center, a hidden space she'd claimed years ago as her thinking spot. The city stretched out in every direction, golden and humming. He looked around. This is the first place you've brought me that's completely yours. She nodded. I wanted you to see where I go when I don't know what to feel. He stepped close, brushing her hair behind her ear. And now I know. She turned to face him, her voice trembling slightly. I love you, Isael. He didn't blink, didn't hesitate. I've been waiting to hear that, he said. But I've known it. Her breath caught as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, frowning. It was a receipt from the cafe where they met. The date was circled. Underneath, he had written one sentence in his slanted handwriting. You changed everything. She looked up, eyes glistening. You kept this. I keep every moment that matters. He dropped to one knee, and the city seemed to pause behind them. I don't want a life that makes sense without you. I want chaos. I want art on the walls and coffee at midnight and your laugh in the middle of my meetings. I want every version of you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled before she could speak. Yes, she said. Yes. He stood and kissed her, the wind tugging at their clothes, the city blinking beneath them like the world had just taken a breath. The wedding came 6 months later, not in a cathedral or a vineyard, but in the art center's newly renovated courtyard, beneath strings of mismatched lights and hand-painted banners made by the kids. She wore yellow not because it was traditional, but because it was joy. He wore gray not because it was understated, but because it let her shine. They danced under the stars, barefoot by the end of the night, cake frosting on their fingers, paint smudges on her arm from a 10-year-old who'd insisted on gifting them a mural. As the music faded and the laughter settled, Isael pulled her into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. Still think you don't belong in my world, she smiled up at him, eyes soft. I don't have to. You built a new one with me. And in that moment, surrounded by light and color and the scent of fresh flowers, Jessa Fairchild knew she hadn't just fallen in love with a CEO, she had created something better, a life they'd drawn together line by line, day by day, no titles, no secrets. Just truth and love, exactly as it had started with one extra coffee and a stranger who turned out to be everything. The morning of the gallery opening arrived with a quiet, golden light that filtered across the hardwood floors of Jessa and Isael's new loft, the kind of place where the windows took up entire walls, and the ceiling beams were exposed wood reclaimed from an old opera house in Florence. It was a space they had chosen together, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like them. Open, honest, unfinished in the most perfect kind of way. Jessa stood barefoot in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the silk wrap of her dress. It was the color of storm cloud silver, with a whisper of lavender when the light hit it right. Isael had picked it out for her weeks ago while she was sketching, casually dropping it onto her easel like it wasn't custom-tailored couture. She'd told him he was ridiculous. He'd told her she deserved to feel like her art. He stepped into the room behind her, adjusting his cufflinks. They were carved obsidian, shaped like tiny brushstrokes. She hadn't noticed them before. You look like you belong in a museum, he said as he kissed her shoulder. She met his eyes in the mirror. Let's hope someone thinks that about the actual paintings. They will, he said. But even if they don't, I already do, she turned, smoothing his collar. You're not nervous, he raised an eyebrow. I've signed contracts worth more than some country's GDP. This is more terrifying, she grinned. Good. Downstairs, a sleek black car waited for them, not a limo, but a restored vintage Bentley Isael had found sitting in a dusty corner of a closed dealership and had rebuilt over 6 months. He'd never said why. She figured it was either nostalgia or symbolism. Maybe both. The gallery was already buzzing when they arrived. The private showing marked Jessa's first solo exhibition, curated by one of the most respected names in contemporary art. The centerpieces were works she had poured herself into, raw, layered, and bold. Her signature was now recognizable, her brushwork studied. What had once been therapy had become demand. As they entered, the crowd shifted. People paused. Not because of Isael's presence, though there were certainly a few double takes when they realized who he was, but because of her. The artist. The woman who had, in a matter of months, gone from community center volunteer to the next name whispered between collectors and critics. Isael stayed a step behind her, watching, letting her own gravity shine. A woman in a cobalt pantsuit approached with a glass of champagne and a clipboard. "Miss Fairchild, the press would like a few words before the second showing begins. Nothing formal, just a few quotes." Jessa hesitated. Isael leaned down, his voice low. "Only if you want to." She nodded, then followed the woman to the corner where a few photographers waited. She answered their questions calmly, confidently, but when someone asked about her inspiration, she glanced at Isael. "Life," she said, her voice clear. "But more than that, being seen for who I am, not who I was expected to be." After the interviews, she drifted to one of the larger canvases, a piece titled Pulse. It was abstract, but bold. Isael's silhouette was hidden in the layers if you knew where to look. She never told anyone. He joined her a moment later. "That one's always been my favorite," he said, tilting his head slightly. She slipped her hand into his. "You don't like attention, but you keep ending up the subject. I don't mind it when it's through your eyes." Later that evening, as the second wave of guests began to trickle in, Isael disappeared. Jessa noticed, but didn't panic. He had a habit of vanishing when things got loud. She figured he was taking a call or perhaps stepping outside for air. She didn't expect to find him standing in front of a sculpture installation in the back room, speaking with a man in a navy wool coat and thick framed glasses. The conversation looked intense, but not tense. When she stepped closer, the man turned. "Miss Fairchild," he said warmly, "I've been waiting to meet you. Isael's told me a great deal." She looked between them. "He doesn't usually talk about me to strangers." "I'm not a stranger," the man replied. "I'm his lawyer." She blinked. "Did something happen?" Isael slipped his arm around her waist. "I've been working on something for us." The lawyer excused himself, leaving them alone. Jessa crossed her arms. "Should I be worried?" He shook his head. "No. I just wanted to tell you in person." "Tell me what?" He took her hands. "I've been restructuring my company." Her eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in boardrooms and quarterly reviews. Not when I have you, not when I have this." He gestured around them. "I've handed over operations. I'm stepping back." She stared at him. "You're walking away from Vaughn dynamics." "I'm not walking away. I'm just choosing where I walk toward." Her breath caught. "You'd really do that?" He nodded. "The empire means nothing if I don't get to live in it." "With you," she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. "You're insane." "I know," he whispered, "but so are you for loving me." The next day, they drove to the Catskills. Not in a jet, not with a team, just the two of them, windows down, her feet on the dashboard. They stayed in a small cabin with no service, no schedule, and no expectations. On the second night, as the fire crackled and the world faded outside the windows, Isael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring. She blinked. "I already said yes," she whispered. He nodded. "I know. But I want to ask properly, not on a rooftop, not after a gala, just here, just us." He held it out to her, an opal set in a gold band, carved with a pattern that looked like paint swirling in water. "Will you marry me, Jessa Fairchild?" he said softly. "Not the artist. Not the girl who gave me coffee, just you." She didn't cry. She laughed. "Yes," she breathed. "You lunatic." They married 3 months later in a converted greenhouse in upstate New York, surrounded by wildflowers, friends, and a sky so clear it felt like the world had opened just for them. Her dress was linen. His suit was navy with no tie. They danced barefoot in the grass while the stars blinked overhead. After the vows, Isael leaned down and whispered, "I didn't know I could have this." She kissed him. You can have anything, but now you have me. Years passed. Their names became known together: Jessa Fairchild, the artist who painted with her whole soul; Isael Vaughn, the man who traded power for purpose. They built a foundation, not on money, but on meaning. They funded art programs in underserved communities, worked with young talent, and filled their home with laughter and music and color. They had a daughter with Isael's eyes and Jessa's wild curls. She liked to finger paint on the walls, and neither of them stopped her. Every morning, Isael made coffee. Every night she painted, and he sat nearby reading, always glancing up like he still couldn't believe she was real. And every year, on the anniversary of the gallery opening, he brought her a new charm for her necklace, not because he needed to impress her, but because he still loved her exactly the way he had the first time, quietly, completely, forever.